5. In opposition to this mighty group of Egyptian life symbols, we meet at the threshold of the classical culture the custom, typifying the ease with which it could forget every piece of its inward and outward past, of burning the dead. To the Mycenaean age, the elevation into a ritual of this particular funerary method amongst all those practised in turn by Stone Age peoples was essentially alien. Indeed, its royal tombs suggest that earth burial was regarded as peculiarly honourable. But in Homeric Greece, as in Vedic India, we find a change so sudden that its origins must necessarily be psychological, from burial to that burning which, the Iliad gives us the full pathos of the symbolic act, was the ceremonial completion of death, and the denial of all historical duration. From this moment, the plasticity of the individual's spiritual evolution was at an end. Classical drama admitted truly historical motives just as little as it allowed themes of inward evolution, and it is well known how decisively the Hellenic instinct set itself against portraiture in the arts. Right into the imperial period, classical art handled only the matter that was, so to say, natural to it, the myth. Footnote. From Homer to the tragedies of Seneca, a full 1,000 years, the same handful of myth figures, Thyestes, Clytemnestra, Heracles, and the like, appear time after time without alteration, whereas in the poetry of the West, Faustian man figures, first as Parsifal or Tristan, then modified always into harmony with the epoch as Hamlet, Don Quixote, Don Juan, and eventually Faust or Werther, and now as the hero of the modern world city romance, but is always presented in the atmosphere and under the conditions of a particular century. End of footnote. Even the ideal portraits of Hellenistic sculpture are mythical, of the same kind as the typical biographies of Plutarch's sort. No great Greek ever wrote down any recollections that would serve to fix a phase of experience for his inner eye. Not even Socrates has told, regarding his inward life, anything important in our sense of the word. It is questionable indeed whether, for a classical mind, it was even possible to react to the motive forces that are presupposed in the production of a Parsifal, a Hamlet, or a Werther. In Plato, we fail to observe any conscious evolution of doctrine. His separate works are merely treatises, written from very different standpoints which he took up from time to time, and it gave him no concern whether and how they hung together. On the contrary, a work of deep self-examination, the Vita Nuova of Dante, is found at the very outset of the spiritual history of the West. How little, therefore, of the classical pure present there really was in Goethe, the man who forgot nothing, the man whose works, as he avowed himself, are only fragments of a single great confession. After the destruction of Athens by the Persians, all the older artworks were thrown on the dust heap, whence we are now extracting them, and we do not hear that anyone in Hellas ever troubled himself about the ruins of Mycenae or Phaistos for the purpose of ascertaining historical facts. Men read Homer, but they never thought of excavating the hill of Troy as Schliemann did, for what they wanted was myth, not history. The works of Aeschylus and those of the pre-Socratic philosophers were already partially lost in the Hellenistic period. In the West, on the contrary, the piety inherent in and peculiar to the culture manifested itself, 5 centuries before Schliemann, in Petrarch, the fine collector of antiquities, coins and manuscripts, the very type of historically sensitive man, viewing the distant past and scanning the distant prospect. Was he not the first to attempt an alpine peak? Living in his time, yet essentially not of it. The soul of the collector is intelligible only by having regard to his conception of time. Even more passionate, perhaps, though of a different colouring, is the collecting bent of the Chinese. In China, whoever travels assiduously pursues old traces, Kuzi, and the untranslatable Tao, the basic principle of Chinese existence, derives all its meaning from a deep historical feeling. In the Hellenistic period, objects were indeed collected and displayed everywhere, but they were curiosities of mythological appeal, as described by Pausanias, to which questions of date or purpose simply did not arise, and this, too, in the very presence of Egypt, which even by the time of the great Thutmosis had been transformed into one vast museum of strict tradition. Amongst the Western peoples, it was the Germans who discovered the mechanical clock, the dread symbol of the flow of time, and the chimes of countless clock towers that echo day and night over West Europe are perhaps the most wonderful expression of which a historical world feeling is capable. In the timeless countrysides and cities of the classical world, we find nothing of the sort. Till the epoch of Pericles, the time of day was estimated merely by the length of shadow, and it was only from that of Aristotle that the word ora received the Babylonian significance of hour. Prior to that, there was no exact subdivision of the day. In Babylon and Egypt, water clocks and sundials were discovered in the very early stages. Yet in Athens, it was left to Plato to introduce a practically useful form of clepsydra, and this was merely a minor adjunct of everyday utility, which could not have influenced the classical life-feeling in the smallest degree. Footnote: it was about 1000 AD, and therefore contemporaneously with the beginning of the Romanesque style and the Crusades, the first symptoms of a new soul, that Abbot Gerbert, Pope Sylvester II, the friend of the Emperor Otto III, invented the mechanism of the chiming wheel clock. In Germany, too, the first tower clocks made their appearance about 1200, and the pocket watch somewhat later. Observe the significant association of time measurement with the edifices of religion. End of footnote. It remains still to mention the corresponding difference, which is very deep and has never yet been properly appreciated, between classical and modern mathematics. The former conceived of things as they are, as magnitudes, timeless and purely present, and so it proceeded to Euclidean geometry and mathematical statics, rounding off its intellectual system with the theory of conic sections. We conceive things as they become and behave, as function, and this brought us to dynamics, analytical geometry, and thence to the differential calculus. The modern theory of functions is the imposing marshalling of this whole mass of thought. It is a bizarre, but nevertheless psychologically exact, fact that the physics of the Greeks, being statics and not dynamics, neither knew the use nor felt the absence of the time element, whereas we, on the other hand, work in thousandths of a second. The one and only evolution idea that is timeless, ahistoric, is Aristotle's entelechy. Footnote: Newton's choice of the name fluxions for his calculus was meant to imply a standpoint towards certain metaphysical notions as to the nature of time. In Greek mathematics, time figures not at all. End of footnote. This, then, is our task. We men of the Western culture are, with our historical sense, an exception, and not a rule. World history is our world picture, and not all mankind's. Indian and classical man formed no image of a world in progress, and perhaps when in due course the civilization of the West is extinguished, there will never again be a culture and a human type in which world history is so potent a form of the waking consciousness.